Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. The state of New Mexico is not serious about prosecuting Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Now, why would I say that? Clearly they're in court, right? They've opened their case, they've started putting on evidence. Well, there are several reasons, and we'll get to those here in just a second. But let's review for anybody who might have been living under a rock in Afghanistan as to what actually happened here. Helena Hutchins was a gifted cinematographer working on the set of the movie Rust with Alec Baldwin and the crew there when Alec Baldwin allegedly used a pistol to try to get a scene exactly correct, and the pistol discharged and killed Helena Hutchins. There were 3 defendants in this case originally. One of them was the guy by the name of Halls, who was the first director. He has pleaded and is assisting in the prosecution. He's a state's witness, essentially. The other 2 have chosen to go to trial, and that's Reed, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and Baldwin. But Hannah goes first because there was a glitch in Baldwin's case originally, and discovery isn't complete in his case, but it is in hers, and she's ready to go to trial. So they've got themselves in a bit of a pickle. Now, I've seen a lot of opening statements. This one was just uninspired. It looked to me like he was just going through the motions. Let's watch a little bit of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Honor, counselors. My name is Jason Lewis, and I know that we were introduced briefly yesterday during the jury selection process. I wanted to introduce myself again. My co-counsel is Carrie Morrissey, who most of you spoke to, at least in some, to some degree yesterday. Also at counsel table is Shad Bowe. He is our IT specialist, and Corporal Alexander Hancock. She is what's called our case agent, and she is a witness who you will be hearing from later, maybe later today, if not certainly by tomorrow. As the judge mentioned earlier, it is Ms. Morrissey's and mine responsibility to prove to your all's satisfaction that Ms. Gutierrez committed the 2 crimes with which she's been charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The 2 crimes she's been charged with are involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. This morning, I hope to give you a roadmap of what we intend to introduce throughout the trial. And although the statements that I'm making this morning aren't evidence, and you can't consider what I'm saying for purposes of your deliberations, I hope to give you a preview of what the evidence is about, what witnesses you're going to be hearing from, and again, kind of highlight some of the key pieces of evidence that we think we're going to be showing you throughout the trial.
So 15 uhs in a little more than a minute and a half. That's pretty unimpressive, and it's obvious that the guy did not in any way rehearse this before he got into court on that particular day. Now, not rehearsing your opening if you're certain of your evidence and stuff, I mean, experienced prosecutors do that. This guy may be a little wet behind the ears in that regard. I can't really tell, but he doesn't seem to have what I would call a mastery of the facts, and he's not talking to the jury. He's basically reading his notes, and it's a little bit off-putting, at least to me. I don't know how the jury feels about it, but I don't think he's really connecting with them. His style is a little crimped, I guess. It'd be a good way to talk about it. But one of the things that he does at one point in here is he starts trending into the area of argument. And it's okay in an opening to give a preview of the evidence, which is what he said he's going to do, but you can't tell the jury how to think about it.
It's important that you know that this photograph was taken on October 10th. And the reason it's important for you to make note that this photograph was taken on October 10th is because the other dummy rounds that were purchased for this movie didn't even arrive to the set until October 12th. So this means that the live ammunition could not have been from the shipment that came in on October 12th and that belonged or that was supplied by somebody other than Ms. Gutierrez.
So there's two charges, involuntary manslaughter and tampering. She is guilty of neither one based on what I heard. Now let's take a moment here and just tell you what's going to happen here in an hour or so after this is after this opening, after all of these openings are done. There's going to be a sheriff that testifies, and I'm going to do a separate video on that, but it is one of the worst direct exams I've ever heard. Here are the problems I see with this prosecution and the reason that after that opening, even before I heard a word from the defendant, I would have voted to acquit if I'd been on that jury. First of all, and most importantly, Hannah never pulled the trigger on that pistol. Think about that. Let's suppose Hannah loads the gun with 6 live rounds. The first director does his job, catches the live rounds, nothing happens. Or Hannah loads the gun with 6 live rounds, the first director doesn't do anything, and Baldwin does his job and checks, and nothing happens. The last set of acts that resulted in the death of Helena Hutchins were A, Baldwin pointing the weapon at her chest, B, Baldwin putting his finger into the trigger well, C, Baldwin pressing the trigger, and then D, Baldwin letting go of the hammer such that the hammer struck the primer on the live round. That is the chain, the last series of acts that caused this death. And Hannah Gutierrez Reed was not even in the same building when that happened. So she may very well have been negligent, all right, because there were live rounds in the gun. She was probably negligent, but she wasn't grossly negligent, and more importantly, she doesn't have causation. Let me give you an analogy based on a civil case. Let's suppose that you are in a real hurry to get to work, and you are rushing to get to work, and the light turns red just before you get to the intersection, and you plow through it, but nothing happens. You don't actually hit another car. There's no cop around because there's never a cop around when anybody needs one, or at least that's the theory. And then you go on to work, and the fact is you were negligent. You should have been going at a slower speed so that you could have stopped when you saw the yellow light. Or you should have been paying closer attention such that you saw the yellow light earlier. You were negligent. But nothing happened. You didn't cause any harm. On the other hand, if you'd been driving that way and little Susie Two Shoes walked out in front of the car just as you got through that red light and you hit her, well, now you not only are negligent, but you have causation. You have harmed somebody who shouldn't have been harmed because you were negligent. So Hannah Gutierrez Reed is in the first category and Baldwin is in the second category. She didn't cause the shooting, Baldwin did, and as a result, she should not be charged or convicted of negligent homicide or involuntary manslaughter. And then the second charge they got on her was tampering with physical evidence. So the state, in its opening, suggested that she had a bag of cocaine.
The second crime that Ms. Gutierrez has been charged with is tampering with evidence. The evidence with regard to this charge is a lot simpler. You're going to hear testimony that on the day that Ms. Hutchins was killed and after the defendant left her interview at the sheriff's office, she went back to her hotel. Knowing that the defendant had probably been through a lot that day, one of her crewmates went to her room to check on her to see how she was doing. And after they were done visiting, the crew member got up to leave, and as she was walking out of the room, the defendant handed her something and asked her to hang on to it for her. At first, this crew member didn't really realize what she had been handed, so she walked out of the room, started down the hallway, and when she looked into her hand, she realized she had been handed a baggie of suspected cocaine from the defendant. She will testify that she was surprised that the defendant, who was somebody she hardly knew, would hand her a bag of suspected cocaine to hang on to for her. The crew member is going to testify that she disposed of the cocaine. She didn't want to be caught with it, so she just threw it away. And you're going to hear that the defendant, over the next several weeks, texted this crew member several times asking her to return her stuff.
Now, the person that the bag of cocaine, alleged bag of cocaine, was given to, threw it away. The state never recovered it, so it wasn't tested. It could have been washing powder. It could have been any number of things. It could have been baking soda. It could have been flour. It could have been sugar. The state can't prove that it was a controlled substance, and there is absolutely no problem with throwing away something or giving to a friend something that is not an element of a crime. And she is not charged in this case with being under the influence of cocaine when this happened. That's not it at all. Rather, she is charged with basically negligent homicide. And there is not a whiff of anything drug-related in the actual investigation or evidence about the shooting. So Hannah had asked the gal that she gave this bag to bring it back to her. And thus, not only was there no evidence of anything criminal that the state can actually prove, but Hannah wanted it back. Thus, there is no intent to obstruct or tamper. And then the issue of where the live rounds came from. Well, you have 54 grown men, or assertedly grown men, together on a ranch, and they're shooting a Western movie. And you have guns on the set that actually shoot bullets. And you can go down to any sporting goods store that sells live rounds and buy 45 long Colt rounds. And if you do that, you can pick up the gun from the armorer, and particularly if she's leaving it on the cart during the evening hours, you could pick up that gun and go shooting. And there's some testimony, or at least some evidence from what I heard in the original investigation, that actually happened, that people went around and used this gun to shoot out on the ranch. And if that's the case, that explains perfectly where the live rounds came from. But even if the live rounds were not from the other men on the set, you have to prove that she purchased, possessed, and inserted those live rounds. And while you can, certainly establish that somebody inserted that, they're going to have to prove that she inserted live rounds, and that's a pretty daunting task. They were in there, but that doesn't mean that she inserted them. Now let's look at the defense opening. It is very measured. It's a pleasure to watch. They don't go up with a lot of technological gizmo. Anybody who watched the trial yesterday knows that the prosecutors had a terrible time just trying to get their opening statement done because they were fiddling around with their technology. So let's watch the opening here and see how the defense goes about diffusing some of this.
May it please the court, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are privileged, our team, to represent Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who's sitting over here. And we're here because of a tragedy, there's no doubt. There was a tragic occurrence on that movie set. But let me tell you something you already know. Just because there was a tragedy does not mean that a crime was committed. It does not mean that Hannah Gutierrez Reed caused the crimes they have charged her with. And we are going to, through the course of this case, show you that production and the state have both, very early on, sought to make Hannah Gutierrez Reed a scapegoat. That's what this is about. You're going to hear that this tragedy, several unconnected events, independent events had to happen to create it. First, the first event that had to happen is the actor, Alec Baldwin, pointed a gun on that set, and he either had his finger on the trigger and the hammer cocked, or he pulled the trigger as he was pointing that at Miss Hutchins and Mr. Souza, who was right behind her. And make no mistake, this is not a prop gun, this is a real gun. Mr. Baldwin pointed it right at him, either had his finger on the trigger and depressed, or pulled it, causing that gun to fire and hit Miss Hutchins. That's the first thing that had to happen. Miss Gutierrez Reed, you're not going to hear anything about her being in that church or firing that weapon. That was Alec Baldwin. You will hear that Hollywood actors are not allowed to point guns, real guns, at other actors or crew. It's like every other safety with guns in any other place in society. You learn these rules and go into the classes. You learn these rules if you've ever owned a gun. Rule number 1, never point a firearm at somebody unless you intend to shoot them.
It's fairly obvious that the defense attorney here gets it. He understands who has causation here, and clearly that's where they're going to attack this case. She didn't cause the injury. She didn't cause the problem. She may have set things in motion by perhaps not doing a good job of checking the firearm, but there were 2 other checks that had to occur before that gun was used, and they didn't happen. And that and the pointing of the gun at a person, which you are never supposed to do, that's what caused the death. An excellent start to the opening. The rest of it was just as good, just as measured, just as clear, and I think just as convincing. Now, why do I say the state is not serious? Well, let's get into that. So the bottom line is the affect of the prosecuting attorney suggests that they're just not serious about this. And they're in a pickle because the real culprit is not ready to go to trial yet. And as a result of that, they have to put this case on because they charged her, and they are not intellectually honest enough to admit that she doesn't have causation here. She may have contributed to it, right? She may have contributed by not checking the gun properly, but she was not involved in the last series of acts that caused this death, and she shouldn't be prosecuted for it. That's my analysis. You may feel free to disagree. In fact, I would love it if somebody could point out to me where I'm wrong. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. And, of course, you're always welcome to email me at the address above. Thanks again for watching. If you have the opportunity today, do something nice for someone. And catch me back here at the beach tomorrow. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.